Hello, and welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Arena. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. We are talking about March of the Machine. It's the new set that's coming out. I'm doing a limited review. We're going card by card through the commons and uncommons. These are the most important cards, the backbone of what forms the limited environment. And I think it's a good idea to familiarize ourselves with it. Let's go ahead and dive into green here. So up first we got Arachnoid Adaptation. This is 1 green, common, instant. Target creature gets +2/+2, gains reach till end of turn, untap it. So this is a very solid combat trick. Because you untap it, it gives surprise vigilance. So you can take, your best attacker, suddenly turn it into a surprise blocker. Also gains reach and a boost. A very similar card for 2 mana that gave +3 was in Innistrad Limited. That card was always, very solid. This being 1 mana, I expect it's going to be very solid here as well. You can't run too many combat tricks in your deck. You need to have a good density of, win conditions. Sometimes you need more direct interaction with the opponent. Green doesn't have quite as much direct interaction, so sometimes you decide to play a combat trick. This is a good one. Not amazing, but it'll do work for you. All right, Atraxa's Fall. So green and a colorless, sorcery, common. Destroy target artifact, battle, enchantment, or creature with flying. Man, if they had just tacked land onto there, then this would have been like a shoo-in for all standard decks anyway. It is not Creeping Mold, but it kills flying creatures and it kills battles. So we've seen this effect a lot in green, but they've shaved a mana off of it and added the new card type Battles to the list of things it blows up. These type of effects were always kind of fringe playable in your main deck to start with. You weren't exactly happy to run it main deck because maybe it doesn't solve the situation. Maybe they don't have a flying creature. Maybe they don't have an artifact or enchantment you care about. But doing all of that and adding Battle to the list and only being 2 mana, I think Atraxa's Fall is main deckable in Limited. It deals with 4 different permanent types. The creature has to have flying. But, man, it looks pretty good to me. There are so many cards that care about battles, and there are plenty of uncommon battles that exist in the format. Red-green's even kind of a battle archetype. I think this is going to be great. So I think destroying a battle is something you want to do to the opponent's battle. I think you want to pull the counters off of your battle, so you want to deal damage to it or remove the counters some other way. I could be wrong about this, but I think if you destroy a battle, then it doesn't transform. So I think this is used to remove an opponent's battle out of the way. I could be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I need to read a little bit more about battles to be absolutely certain of the rules interactions. But either way, this card looks great. You don't run like 10 of them in your deck or anything, but I think you can definitely run a copy or two. Blighted Burgeoning. This is a green and 2 colorless, common, enchantment aura, enchant land. When it enters the battlefield, you incubate 2. Let's make a little incubator token. It's not a creature yet. And whenever the enchanted land is tapped for mana, so not for other purposes, but just for mana, then its controller adds an additional 1 mana of any color. This looks pretty good. So it color fixes you, it accelerates you, and it gives you an incubator token. For what it's worth, it also gives you an enchantment. As far as limited is concerned, I think this is probably one of the better pieces of mana fixing and acceleration that we're going to see. There are some other options that we'll take a look at, but this one seems really good. You know, it doesn't flip the incubator token quite yet, so it takes another investment of mana. The interesting part, though, is if you play this on 4, to where you have 4 lands available, you play this on an untapped land, you would have 2 mana at that point, which you could use at instant speed to flip the incubator token. So if you wait a turn, don't do it on 3 and you do it on 4, it can actually give you the 2/2 right away, which I think is kind of neat. This is going to play well with some various synergies. You know, Phyrexian synergies, +1 counter synergies, if there are artifact synergies, and just being a good piece of mana fixing and acceleration it's gonna be widely played for that reason. It's a very nice card. All right, Chomping Kavu, green and 3 colorless. It's a common, 3/3 Kavu. Nice to see some Kavus again. Backup 1. And this creature can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So, it's kind of a funky ability, but you can give its counter to something else. And maybe, you know, as long as you do your math right, you know, kind of figure out what the opponent has open to block, maybe you can make their blocks kind of impossible or bad. And maybe they have to block with something they don't want to. Maybe they choose to let it through in that case, or maybe they just can't block it. And then either way, you've either got this 3/3 that's a little bit harder to block, or a 4/4. So I think the Chomping Kavu is fair. I think this is a fair card. I think it's at a fair rate. It's going to play well into +1 counter themes, you know, Voltron decks, stuff like that, where you've got something with, I don't know, lifelink or double strike that you really want to boost up. Or just a big flyer or trampler. Yeah, this card's playable. It's not, like, incredibly special, but it's definitely playable. Converter Beast. So, green and 3 colorless. For a 0/1 common Phyrexian Beast, when it ETBs, you incubate 5. So it's not a creature quite yet, but for 2 mana at instant speed, you'd get a 5/5. So total investment of 6 mana, you get 5 power and 6 toughness on 2 bodies. You can pay it in installments. One of the things that's interesting to me about Converter Beast would be flickering it, and white can do that. White has ways to flicker in this set, even at common. Green-black wouldn't be too bad either, right? You play the Converter Beast, chump block with it, maybe sacrifice it for value, and then you get it back from the graveyard. Get the ETB trigger all over again. Just, yeah, this seems like a really strong piece for a value deck. As long as you can, you know, trigger this effect more than once, Converter Beast is going to start doing some amazing work for you. Also in the Incubate deck, I believe there's a gold uncommon that can transform an incubator and double the number of counters on it. It's really interesting with this card. It would make a 10/10 that way. So overall, I think Converter Beast is going to have some interesting play in the format. I think it's not bad on its own. even if you didn't have the synergies for it, getting two bodies where one of them's a 5/5, that's not bad. You also get this fodder that you can chump away, get it from the graveyard, flicker it, sacrifice it. Seems like there are a number of decks that would like to have this. I think it's going to be pretty good. All right, Copperhost Crusher. So 6 colorless, 2 green, uncommon, it's an 8/8. Phyrexian Bear Rhino. It has trample and hexproof. 8/8 for 8, trample and hexproof. So once you get this on the battlefield, it's a game-ending threat. Your opponent, they need to throw everything they've got at this thing to stop it. Maybe if they've got a Death Toucher, then they've got a high enough life total, they'll Death Touch it, take 7, hope that that's good enough. So I've played formats where 8 drops were a thing, and you do not casually get to 8 mana. You can casually get to 6 mana, just kind of a long game, just sort of curve out, and sooner or later you get to your 6 drops. The same is not true of 8 drops. 7 drops are at kind of a strange middle point there where maybe you can get to it without ramping or just a little bit of ramping. 8 drops, you need lots of ramping. You need a decent amount of dedicated ramp in your deck to hit 8 drops. There are ways to do it. We looked at that enchantment. We're going to look at some other cards. There's even a battle that'll get 2 lands out of your deck for you. But if you want to play this card, even though this format will probably be slower than Phyrexia All Will Be One, I don't think it's so slow that you can give no consideration to your deck building and just shove 8 drops into it. You need ramp. And you can do it. You can take this card, you can absolutely ramp up to it, but you must prioritize taking the ramp pieces in order to get there. And you don't really need to prioritize taking the ramp pieces if you don't have a payoff. If you don't have a big top end in the deck, there's no reason to ramp to 8 or 9 or 10 mana if you don't have anything to do with it. So, if you see this card, you want to angle that way, you can. Just be aware that it does not happen casually or easily. Oh, and one last thing. If you do get this down on the battlefield, it would play pretty nicely with some equipment. You can't count on having an aura for it by the time you cast it, but you could have a bunch of equipment laying around. Little white equipment gives +1/+1 in vigilance. That sounds nice. Or red equipment, +2 power, or +1 in menace, and make a treasure. Let's go. Yeah, this has hexproof. All the opponent can really do is block it and hope for the best. So this card by itself kind of makes ramp a viable target. If you have something this good to angle for, you can try. Alright, Cosmic Hunger. It's a green and a colorless, instant, it's common. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature, planeswalker, or battle. So there's been a couple of these instant speed, not exactly fight effects in the last few sets. This one's better because it hits battles. So for that reason, it is a little bit strictly better than, say, Master's Rebuke, whatever it's called. There's 1 or 2 other things like it. So it's good. This is kind of how green does removal. It's very strong. In this case, it even hits battles. So you can flip your battles over. I like it. If you're in green, you'll probably play some amount of this to have some interaction. All right. Crystal Carapace, green and 3 colorless. It's a common enchantment aura. So it goes on a creature. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3 and has Ward 2. You can also cycle this card. So for 2 colorless, you can discard it and draw a card. The neat thing about this aura is if you catch the opponent when they can't blow up your creature in response, which might be hard because there's Convoke. So Convoke might be able to blow you out even if you don't think they have removal. But this gives the creature Ward 2, which means it's actually more difficult to 2-for-1 you. I'm not saying you still can't get 2-for-1s, but you're going to tax the opponent's mana in the process. So that's neat. And if you decide that this is not really what you need, you can cycle it away, find something else. So an aura that gives something like Ward on it, I start to think is close to being playable because it protects the creature, makes it a less exciting target for a removal spell because your opponent's going to have to maybe take the turn off to deal with it. And if you really feel like it's not the right card for the board state, you can cycle it away. So yeah, I don't think this is like a high pick or anything, but I think it's actually playable. I don't usually say that about auras. But since it's got, +3/+3 in Ward 2, or you can cycle it, and seems alright to me. Yeah, maybe kind of a filler card, but maybe if you're going for a Voltron build, it's not bad. Alright, Fertilid's Favor. It's 1 green and 3. Instant, common. Target player searches their library for a basic land, puts it on the battlefield tapped, shuffles. You put 2 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target artifact or creature. So in the case of an artifact, maybe that's like an incubator token or a vehicle. This is actually pretty cool. I don't like combat tricks most of the time, but I do like ramp. I like ramping. I like color fixing. Very often you're forced into a position of 2 colors, and there are a lot of neat gold legends that exist up in the higher rarities, along with interesting gold cards at the higher rarities. This can help you build a multicolor deck. At the same time, it's an instant. I think you can permanently boost a creature with 2 counters. And I think it's a neat combination of abilities here. So I actually like this card. I like it because it's a combat trick that also ramps you. And even though the land comes in tapped, it's an instant. So, sure, it comes in tapped on your opponent's turn, but then you untap. You got at least 5 mana. Maybe you got 6. I think this is a cool card. Yeah, mana fixes you too. I like this. I think this is neat. It'll work very nicely in the +1 counter deck. You could take like a white double strike creature, put 2 counters on it, something like that. Pretty good. Alright, Iridescent Blade Master. Green and a colorless, 2/2, common, elf warrior. Kaladesh. I think the art is just beautiful on Kaladesh. The color palette on this card is very pretty. I like seeing some purple. And green. Anyway. You can pay a green and 3. Iridescent Blade Master gets +2/+2 until end of turn. You see creatures like this about once a set in green. Pay a bunch of mana in, and it gets bigger. So in this case, it threatens to be a 4/4. I guess if you got up to 8 mana, it could threaten to be a 6/6. So Blade Master is going to be fine. It's an early game play. It can attack better than a lot of things can because you can threaten to pump it. And the threat of activation means that a lot of times the opponent has to respect that and let it through. If you think the opponent wouldn't mind trading away their creatures, maybe you don't make that attack if you want to use your mana elsewhere. Need to be a little mindful of that. And then if there gets to be a ground stall, the Blade Master, if you got mana open, threatens to be a 4/4 on defense. This card's not amazing or anything, and it gets maybe a little worse in multiples because there's only so many activations you can pay. But as 2-drops go, I think this is pretty reasonable. I think it's a playable card. Alright, Kami of Whispered Hopes. Green and 2 colorless. It's an uncommon. It's a 1/1 spirit. If one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, that many +1 +1/+1 counters are put on that permanent instead. So it makes one extra +1 counter go on the permanent. And I do believe that this would just instantly boost your incubator tokens. It doesn't turn them into creatures right away, but it makes them a point bigger because they are permanents and they get counters on them. It's also going to play well in the white-green deck. White-green has a +1 counter theme. This also has the ability of tap, add X mana of any one color where X is Kami of Whispered Hope's power. So even if you weren't taking advantage of its ability, it would be a 1/1 mana ramp color fixer for 3 mana. It wouldn't be great if you're only using it like that, but it wouldn't be the worst either. If you've made a 5-color deck, then you need every bit of color fixing you could get at that point. So being a mana tapper creature for 3 mana, it's okay. But really you want to run this if you've got +1 counters in your deck. And there are multiple decks that do that. So it's a neat card. It's a neat card. I'm pretty sure it's going to find homes in various synergies in the set. And at the very least, it taps for mana of any color. And it could tap for a lot of mana if you bump up its power. And that's interesting. Red's got that 1 mana piece of equipment that pumps up 2 power. That would actually go mana positive. Right? You'd pay 1 red for the equipment, and then the Kami could tap for 3 instead of 1. It'd make 2 extra mana. That's neat. Anyway. Overgrown Pest. Green and 2 colorless. Common, 2/2. It's a pest. That's Strixhaven. When it ETBs, look at the top 5 cards of your library. Reveal a land or double-faced card from among them. Put it into your hand. The rest goes on the bottom in a random order. So, you're pretty likely to hit a land in 5 cards. If you've put like 16 lands into your limited deck, you should see about 2 lands out of 5 cards. So it should help you hit your land drops. It's not quite as good at fixing your mana, but hitting any land drops whatsoever helps you fix your mana to some degree. Double-face cards. There are common creatures, there's a cycle of them, that are transforming. There are uncommons that transform. Battles are double-faced cards. There's a decent number of hits that you could have on the spells portion of your deck, in addition to the land portion of your deck. So if you're just playing it to get land, it's kind of like a slightly worse Civic Wayfinder, which is still probably a reasonable card. but it could also draw you double face cards. And I think Overgrown Pest is going to be pretty useful. Comes down, finds you a land or a spell. Yeah, pretty nice. I like it. Pretty unlikely to whiff with this. If you know you've built your deck in such a way that the only thing that you can hit is land, then you might not value the pest quite as highly. It'd still probably be playable, though. Placid Rottentail. This is 1 green. It's a common 1/1 fungus rabbit. It has vigilance. You can pay a green and 2 colorless and exile this from your graveyard. You put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. You can only do this as a sorcery. So a 1/1 with vigilance is bad. The deck that wants this is probably the black-green Aristocrats deck. Core Black has a lot of sacrifice outlets, has a lot of Aristocrat stuff just built into it. It's not just black-red. I'm pretty sure if you go black-green, you can make a very solid Aristocrats build out of that as well. Placid Rottentail goes right into that because you get this early creature, you don't mind sacrificing it, gets added value out of the graveyard. Placid Rottentail also plays reasonably well into the green-white deck that cares about +1 counters. If you're afraid of its, ability from the graveyard, if you're worried about how that's going to affect the board state, maybe it grows some menace or flying creature up out of range where you can't deal with it. Maybe you don't block the Placid Rottentail. Maybe you don't attack to where they could choose to chump block with it. Most of the time you probably don't have to be afraid of it. But it's an on-board trick. It's something you can see coming. It's something to be aware of. The other place this could be useful is in mill. Right, all the mill effects in the set are symmetrical. If you're wanting to do some mill, you can get value out of the graveyard this way. So this is not a useless card. Right, there are deck archetypes that want this. You just need to make sure that your deck is one of them before you just randomly throw it in. Because as I said, a 1/1 vigilance is bad. You really want to make sure you're finding the graveyard value. Portent Tracker. So green and a colorless. A common, it's a 1/1 Satyr Scout. Tap it to untap target land, so it's a mana creature. Not a mana fixer, but can accelerate you. Could be really nice if you've got the aura that goes on land. If you're untapping that land, you're making a ton of mana. That would be a quick path towards your late game. The other thing you can do is tap to choose target battle. If an opponent protects it, meaning if it's your battle, you remove a defense counter. Otherwise, you add a defense counter. You can only do that as a sorcery. So the land untapping works at instant speed. So if you want to use them for mana, you can keep them open as instant speed mana. But if you want to muck with battles, you have to do that on your turn. It's neat that you can do this over and over again. It can just ping away a battle without ever dealing combat damage to it. You can also keep your opponent off of their battles, annoy them to death with your Portent Tracker. He probably does his best work by accelerating your mana. And if you've got Blighted Burgeoning, this aura, then Portent Tracker is going to do great work for you. I think that would be an exciting way to build a ramp deck, actually. Turn 2 Portent Tracker, turn 3 you get down your aura. Maybe your opponent wasn't prioritizing killing the tracker. Now it kind of looks like they really need to. Okay. Ravenous Sailback. Green and 4 colorless, uncommon. It's a 3/4 dinosaur. And when it ETBs, you choose one. It can gain haste, so 3/4 with haste for 5. Not that exciting, but if you're in a position where attacking looks good, why not? Taking a turn off of the clock makes it that much better in that regard. Or destroy target artifact or enchantment. I love that mode on this card. Probably some of what you're going to be hitting is destroying incubator tokens, which if you get a big one with 4 or 5 counters, you're going to feel pretty good about that. Especially if it's flipped already. And the other thing I wanted to say about this card is I think it could have constructed application. I know you're going to look at me like I'm crazy right now because it's a 5 mana 3/4, but artifacts and enchantments are such a big deal in Standard that some people run 3 copies of Lauren of the Third Path. Little 2/1 Vigilance for 3 mana. And they'll legend rule themselves to blow up artifacts and enchantments with her enters the battlefield trigger. We've really been needing some more creatures that do this when they enter the battlefield. Now green has Titan of Industry. It's also got Cleanup Crew at 6 mana. And believe it or not, Cleanup Crew is entirely playable in Constructed. You just need a ramp deck. Right, against aggro you use the 4 life gain. And you've been gaining life on your way up to 6 mana. The Sailback is an option at 5 mana. 5 mana to destroy an artifact or enchantment, which I like. You can run this in a deck along with like Vivian. Vivian can go up the mana costs to cycle creatures into play and hit their ETB triggers. So, Vivian could go like, gain 4 life Kavu into Ravenous Sailback, blows up a thing into Cleanup Crew, blows up a thing into Titan of Industry, blows up a thing. You can also hit a wide variety of creatures in a toolbox set up like that with, the green card that's like the Gifts Ungiven, but they all have to have different powers. That card's more playable than people think as well. You probably don't run 4 copies of it in a deck unless you have like a 120 card deck or something. But it's easy to run like 1 or 2 copies of that spell in a deck. And you can find the toolbox array of things you need where, 4 cards are close enough in effect to what you want to be doing at the board state. You want to ramp. You find creatures that are like 1, 2, 3, and 4 mana at different powers. ETB and, find lands, or, they tap for mana, stuff like that. Now we can maybe search up creatures that blow up artifacts and enchantments. Right, at 4 mana, there's like Sawblade Slinger. It ETBs to blow up an artifact or fight a zombie. Which, by the way, I discovered that Glissa's a zombie. The other day, when I was running Sawblade Slinger, I was like, oh, I can fight Glissa. And, Sawblade Slinger will die, because Glissa has Death Touch. But she'll kill Glissa, because the first strike doesn't matter. That was interesting. Neat interaction, if Glissa becomes widespread. Okay, I've talked enough, I suppose. Let me just say that I like Ravenous Sailback, and I think it's better than it looks, and I think it will do just fine. Find a home in your limited deck. Okay, Sandstalker Moloch. Green, green, and a colorless. It's uncommon. It's a 4/2 lizard. It has flash. When it ETBs, if an opponent cast a blue and or black spell this turn, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can reveal a permanent card from among them, put it in your hand, put the rest on the bottom in a random order. You are, in a green deck, you are so unlikely to whiff, looking at the top 4 cards of your library. Because most spells are permanents. Lands are permanents. So you're very, very likely to hit something. Almost certainly. When you cast the Sandstalker Moloch. Now, that only happens if an opponent casts a blue or black spell this turn. The flash makes it more likely that you can, find a way to do that if they have blue or black in their deck. And if they do not, it's 4/2 with flash for 3 mana, which is still a reasonable card and playable. So some of the other color hosing cards that I've looked at in the other colors, like the one in red that goes from 1 damage to 5 damage, the 1 damage on that red card seems really weak to me. But this being a 4/2 flash for 3, that seems fine. I don't know if it will be able to attack in well in this format, but it can certainly block. It's a very good blocker, and it comes in at instant speed to be a surprise blocker. So I think the Sandstalker Moloch is a reasonable card, even if it's not drawing you a card. And most of the time, you're probably finding one of the best cards out of your top 4, if you're not that heavy on instants and sorceries. So I like this. Your opponent doesn't have to be playing blue or black. It's still okay. Flash it in as a 4-power blocker. So yeah, I think Sandstalker Moloch is entirely playable. I think it's pretty. Seed of Hope. 1 green, common, instant. Mill 2 cards. You may put a permanent card from among the milled cards into your hand. You gain 2 life. So this is very likely to find you a card. If you only have a couple of instants and sorceries in your entire deck, then you're incredibly unlikely to, whiff on this. If most of your deck is just lands and permanents. Now, that's not to say that this is great. It gives you something to do with 1 mana, gains you 2 life, puts a card in your graveyard and a card in your hand to replace itself. So, if you get value out of your graveyard, if milling yourself is something you would like to do, then this card will probably be pretty good for you, as long as you're not running too many instants and sorceries. If you're running some powerful instants and sorceries and you've got quite a number of them, removal spells and whatnot, then I don't think I would run Seed of Hope in that deck, just on the off chance that you whiff with it. And just because it'll hit most of the time doesn't mean that I'm that impressed with the effect. You're kind of spinning your wheels, you're kind of getting some really incremental advantage by casting this. It's okay. But I think it's more like fringe playable if you don't have graveyard synergies. It's all right, but I don't love it or anything. It feels like a filler card. All right. Serpent Blade Assailant, green and 2 colorless. It's a 2/1 common elf warrior. It has backup 1 and Death Touch. This is a Death Touch creature where I feel very good about giving away its counter. Because a 2/1 Death Toucher is, for most intents and purposes, about as good as a 3/2 Death Toucher would have been. Makes it very likely that the thing you put the counter on is going to get in that turn. Because the opponent knows the Death Touch is going to go away. And if you're not in the best position to trade with it, don't have something lined up and ready that would love to trade with it, probably just let it through that turn. So you probably get some damage in. Now you've got this Death Touch blocker that's left over, and the other creature still has a counter left on it. Sounds pretty good in general. I think this is going to be good in the green-white archetype, and it's not bad, just generally speaking. Death touch creatures are useful. So this will be playable even if you're not in the +1 counter archetype. So I think it's just generally an okay playable card. Storm the Seed Core. 2 green, 2 colorless, uncommon sorcery. Distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among up to 4 target creatures you control. Creatures you control gain vigilance and trample until end of turn. So this is kind of an overrun. It's nice that it doesn't just give trample, but it also gives vigilance. So you still have stuff left up to block for you in case this attack doesn't work. And the +1 counters can stick around forever. So if you don't win that turn, your creatures are permanently boosted. I feel like this is a pretty strong effect. I hesitate to call it a trick because it's at sorcery speed, but your opponent might still not see it coming. Might not be ready for it the turn that you play it. You can't run too many of these in a deck. You need to make sure that you've got, creatures on the board, you've been interacting and doing all of that, but it's probably very nice to have at least one copy of this floating around in your deck somewhere. Might be able to give you an Alpha Strike turn, or at the very least, some good profitable attacks, and put your opponent in a hard position. So, yeah, the thing that's neat about this is it could still be reasonable when you're behind, unlike an overrun. Yeah, that's the thing about this card that I'm kind of digging. So you can make something big, give out some vigilance, still have blockers. So even when you're behind, this could, put you back up towards parity. I like it. Streetwise Negotiator. Green and a colorless. 0/2. Uncommon. Cat Citizen. So from New Capenna. Has backup 1. And this creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So this could be a 1/3, which would effectively be a 3/3. And actually a 3/3 for 2 mana is a nice deal. Yeah, now that I'm looking at this, this can be a 3/3 for 2. That's good. That's good. A 3/3 for 2 is good. You could also, can give away the counter and effectively be like a 2/2 on its own, pump something else up. Maybe it benefits from the assigning with toughness rather than power. Maybe it doesn't. It'll benefit from the +1 counter either way. But I think the mode of playing this as a 1/3 that acts like a 3/3 on turn 2, man, that sounds pretty good. That's aggressive. All right, Streetwise Negotiator. I like it. Okay, Tandem Takedown. Green, green, and 1. Uncommon, instant. Up to 2 target creatures you control each get +1/+0 until end of turn. They each deal damage equal to their power to another target creature, planeswalker, or battle. So for 3 mana, 2 of your creatures get a power pump and gang up on a target. The target being a creature, planeswalker, or battle. So if you use this to flip a battle, that's cool. Maybe you can also now attack profitably with these creatures. This even works on defense. It's an instant. You can pump up your blocking creature's power. Take something out. Probably better on offense most of the time, but I mean, this is it's kind of a double fight. It can't kill two targets though. You're not going to be able to 2-for-1 the opponent. But if both of your creatures are big enough, then even if they try to take one out in response, the other one, if it's big enough, will still kill the target. 3 mana is a lot to pay for a trick, but it's not just a trick. It's not just a power boost. It's also a removal spell. And I think it's a pretty good one. You need double green pips to cast it, though. Alright, Tangled Skyline. Green and 4 colorless, uncommon enchantment. When this ETBs, you gain 5 life and incubate 5. And Phyrexians you control have reach. So if you have Phyrexians, bringing this down, giving your Phyrexians reach and gaining 5 life, that is a heck of a stabilizing force on the board. And then if you have 2 mana, or when you have 2 mana, you can get a 5/5, and it's going to have reach. This card seems good to me. It'll really be of its greatest value in a deck with Incubator tokens or Phyrexians. But I think this card is actually playable on its own. Yeah, 7 mana paid in installments to get a 5/5 with reach and gain 5 life. I think that's good enough. Comes with potential upside as well. You got other Phyrexians. And, maybe you can blink this or regrow it from the graveyard. I think this is a pretty good card. There's some interesting legends on the bonus sheet that care about life gain. There's not a lot of ways to gain life. There's the tap lands, right? The dual tap lands that gain 1. This is a card that gains life. So if you have some of those weird legends, pay attention. You might want to pick up a Tangled Skyline. Timberland Ancient, 2 green, 4 colorless. It's a common 6/5 Treefolk. It has Reach and Trample, and it has Forest Cycling. So you can pay 2 colorless and discard it to go find a forest, put it in your hand. That's pretty cool. It can help you hit land drops. It can help fix your mana if you don't have a forest already. It's also a good body on the battlefield. 6/5 Reach Trample. Big. Stops opposing flyers. Can trample in for the win. Just seems solid overall. A very similar creature to this was not so great in Phyrexia All Will Be One because the format was very fast. This format, I think, is going to be slower, and this card has Forest Cycling on it. And I think this card is going to be much better than that card was. I think this is going to be very playable. Could be your path to winning the game. Just have 2 or 3 of these as your late game in a ramp deck. You can always Forest Cycle it early, which in a ramp deck you probably want. So yeah, I think this is an entirely playable card. Vengeant Earth. Green and a colorless, common, instant. Target creature or land you control becomes a 4/4 elemental creature with haste. In addition to its other types until end of turn, it must be blocked this turn if able. Not by everything. If you're older, you remember cards like Lure. Just, blocked by one thing. It just must be blocked. The opponent cannot choose to let it through. So this is a power toughness setter. It's a little bit better if you take a small creature with some ability like, I don't know, first strike or double strike, something like that, make it gigantic, or maybe trample. You can also animate a land, and that's neat. So it works pretty well on offense because you can force a block. That probably means you're going to kill something of the opponent's. You can also, at instant speed, animate a land and get a surprise blocker. At that point, it kind of takes like 3 mana because you need an untapped land. But yeah, you can have a surprise 4/4 blocker on the opponent's turn. Or you can have a 4/4 land that must be blocked to attack in with, or you can surprise pump a small creature. There's some neat modality on this card. For that reason, it can kind of play like a flash creature, kind of play like a removal spell, kind of play like a pump spell. It's interesting. It's interesting. You know, I don't love it, but I don't hate it either. It's neat, and I think it's going to be interesting to try it out, play with it, and see how it works in the format. War Historian. Green and 2 colorless. It's a 3/3 common human monk. It has reach. It's indestructible as long as it attacked a battle this turn. So it's not the easiest thing to be able to just block a 3/3 indiscriminately without worry or concern on the opponent's part. So if you're a battle deck and you're looking to flip your battles over, War Historian can just crash in indestructible, and the opponent has to decide if they can safely block it or not. And I think that's interesting. And if you are just looking at it without a battle, it's a 3/3 with reach, which is very much on rate. Very much on rate. Very good blocker. Overall, this seems just like a great 3-drop creature in green. Seems like it's just kind of all upside. You know, the floor is good, the ceiling's very high. I like it. I like it even better in a battle deck. Wary Thespian. Green and a colorless. It's a common 3/1 cat druid. When Wary Thespian enters the battlefield or dies, surveil 1. So comes down as a 3/1 on turn 2. You get to surveil 1 right away. So if you don't like the card, throw it in your graveyard, or if it gets, you know, value out of your graveyard, that's great. Does this again when it dies. And a 3/1 for 2 is a good card. It's on rate. It's threatening if the opponent has no blockers. And maybe more importantly, it's a very good blocker. So even if it can't get in very profitably, there's every likelihood it will trade with something of the opponent's and give you another surveil. Which, again, could give you graveyard value, or the kind of value that just scrying would give you. You know, get something out of the way that you don't want to see. Another land, perhaps. Wary Thespian seems playable. I don't think it's amazing or anything, but it seems playable. It seems okay. You know, it gives you some extra value, not just with graveyard synergy, but also with aristocrats, right? If you sack this and it dies, you get a surveil out of it. I think it has jobs to play in different deck archetypes, and would not be the worst thing to just cast it for 2 mana if you happen to be in green. I think this is pretty reasonable. Wildwood Escort. Green and 4 colorless. 3/3 common elf warrior. So when this ETBs, return target creature or battle card from your graveyard to your hand. If this would die, exile it instead. So it's a little bit sad that it exiles when it dies, although that can actually keep cards out of your graveyard if your opponent wants you to have cards in your graveyard. I think maybe blue-black has some payoffs for opponents that have 8 or more cards in their graveyard. So Wildwood Escort actually, pulls one card out of your graveyard and then prevents itself from going to your graveyard. So it's almost tech against that style of deck. 3/3 for 5 is nothing amazing. Most of the cards in Homelands are like 3/3s for 5. but it can draw you a card. It can be a creature or a battle. And that's pretty nice. So you get this kind of bigger Gravedigger effect. And I feel like that's generally playable, generally okay in most decks. Some decks will be able to get more value out of it if you've been doing mills, have a assortment of things to choose from in your graveyard. But any deck where the game goes long and you're looking to kind of 2-for-1 the opponent and keep getting more value than they're getting, Wildwood Escort will do well there. Overall, I think it's just a nice card. Fine card. Okay, we're going to jet on down to the double face cards for green now. Bonded Herd Beast. It's green and 4 colorless. It's a common, 4/5 beast. You can pay 4 colorless and a Phyrexian red mana, transform the Bonded Herd Beast, activate only as a sorcery. So on the front face, it's just straight up a 4/5 for 5. That is basically on rate. Basically good enough. I've seen, better 5-drops. It's okay though, but wait, there's more. Act now and you could get Plated Kiln Beast. This is a 7/5 red and green Phyrexian Beast with Menace. Menace and the power boost. This makes a world of difference here. Now, if you crash in with this thing, you're almost certainly going to kill 2 things of the opponent's. At the very least, you're probably going to be able to nab 1 thing of the opponent's that they didn't really want to block with. And Menace kind of opens the door for combat tricks and other stuff to blow out the opponent. Because double blocking is always a little risky. And 7/5 Menace, it's a 3-turn clock. Deals 21 damage over the course of 3 turns. And you can do that as soon as the next turn when you would have been able to attack with the Bonded Herd Beast anyway. You can either pay 4 and 2 life, or 5 mana if you have a red. So, I think this card's pretty good. It's more of a go big kind of strategy, but you can sort of count it as being a 7/5 Menace for 5, because the next turn it can be. It's a very aggressive line, as long as you are defending your life total adequately. 7/5 Menace is a very good attacker. So I think it's pretty good. Notvold Hermit, green and 3 colorless, uncommon 4/4 troll. You can pay 5 and a Phyrexian blue to transform this, only as a sorcery. So again, it's a 4/4 for 4, which is, square deal, fair card, on rate. The very next turn, you can pay 2 life and transform it if you hit your land drop. It turns into Chrome Host Hulk, which is a green-blue 5/5 Phyrexian troll. Whenever it attacks, up to 1 other target creature has base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. So I'm not going to say it necessarily puts 10 power and toughness on the board, right? Because the other creature had some kind of power and toughness to start with, but it might. It might put 10 power and toughness on the board if you get like, a flipped incubator token. Because a flipped incubator token is a 0/0. And this would give it a +5/+5 boost. So, you might be putting 10 power and toughness on the board for offense, right? It's when it attacks. But that's a heck of a boost. Going from 4/4 as an attacker to 10/10 power boost, power and toughness boost across 2 creatures. That's a clock. That's threatening. Clearly better when you're ahead. And I think that's kind of a theme with a lot of these transforming cards, is they can really run away with the game if you're ahead. You're kind of more so if you're at parity. You might flip them, you might play something else out of your hand. And when you're behind, the front face of it really needs to be good enough. You can't afford to be paying life so much if you're behind. If you don't have anything better to do, you might activate it, but just an interesting thing to note with these double face cards. They'll seem kind of aggressive and better when you're ahead. I like this one though. I like this troll. The potential of putting 10 power and toughness of extra attacking stuff on the board on the backside here. Man, oh man. Okay. Then we've got Herbology Instructor. Green and a colorless. This is an uncommon 1/3 Treefolk Druid. When this ETBs, you gain 3 life. So there's not a lot of sources of life gain in this format. So if you've got one of the funky, legend sheet rares that cares about like life gain strategies, there's a couple of ETBs in green that do this. So, here's one of them. 1/3 for 2 is not the worst. Blocks your opponent's early game stuff. You can pay 6 and a Phyrexian black to transform this, only as a sorcery. So this one has kind of a wide gulf of time between when you play it in the early turns and when you're able to activate it. Late game, maybe there's a chance you could activate it immediately or the next turn. It flips into a Malady Invoker. So you get a 3/3, so, it gets 2 more power. And when it transforms, target creature and opponent controls gets -0, -X until end of turn, where X is Malady Invoker's power. So unless you've gotten some +1 counters on this or something, then most of the time you're going to lower an opponent's creature's toughness by 3, which is not a bad removal spell. It's at sorcery speed. They should know that it could be something that's coming. It's an onboard trick. They might not know if you're going to hit the mana the next turn, though. They might choose to keep, like mana open and a combat trick or something open if they think you might flip this. It's still pretty good, though. So yeah, it's either 6 or 7 mana to flip this and give an opponent's creature at least like -3 toughness. Maybe more, if you've got equipment or +1 counters on this thing. Overall, I think this is pretty playable. It's a nice piece of ground stall, life gain. So if you're setting up for a longer game of Magic in Limited, then this will help to keep you alive. Later in the game, you can flip it over and kill something of the opponent's and get a bigger creature. Just seems overall pretty reasonably playable, good value proposition. Not something that a faster deck's going to want, but a grindier deck, definitely. Okay, Invasion of Muraganda. So green and 4 colorless, uncommon. It's a battle with 6 defense, When it ETBs, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then that creature fights up to one target creature you don't control. So this is an incredibly expensive fight spell that comes with a +1 counter. So, it does technically boost your creature and act as a removal spell. It does have value, but it comes down at 5 mana at sorcery speed. So color me not that impressed. It can, though, maybe fight a blocker out of the way so you're able to attack in to flip this more effectively. Which I guess is not nothing. And when you do flip it, you get a Primordial Plasm. It's a 4/4 green ooze. At the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature gets +2/+2 and loses all abilities until end of turn. So you could turn off something of the opponent's for combat on your turn. It gets a +2/+2 boost, though. I think it's more likely you want to give something of yours a boost. Maybe the most likely prospect for that would be like an incubator token, where now it's got 2 extra power and toughness because it was a 0/0, and the +1/+1 counters sidestep the lose all abilities. Anyway, a 4/4 is, a usable creature, sizable body. It can give something of yours a boost. It can maybe shut off something of the opponent's for combat on your turn. It's weird. It's far from useless, though. It definitely has useful applications. The main thing that I don't like as much about this is that it feels too expensive on the front face. It feels like you're overpaying for what you get on the front. And 6 defense is quite a bit. If you do flip it over, you will have something that is of value to you. A 4/4 that can muck with combat in one way or another. So, I don't love this, but I don't hate it either. I can hear the siren song of, long game grindy value in this card. So in limited, this is probably playable. You want battles in the red-green archetype. Red-green is very good at flipping over battles. So even though this is too expensive, you might just want it anyway. Then it'll turn into a fatty that makes your other fatties bigger. It's all right. Invasion of Zendikar. Green and 3 colorless. Uncommon battle has 3 defense. When it ETBs, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. I love this. I love Explosive Vegetation, or the one from Nemesis that only got forests, but they came into play untapped. That one's really good, by the way. This comes in a long line of 4 mana double ramps, and it's great. Anything that does a double ramp for 4 mana, I'm already considering it for, constructed playability. And this has added upside. It's a battle. It has 3, defense, life points, whatever. So I would play it just for the mana ramp and the color fixing. So, if you've gone into multiple colors, and you've got, some 6, 7, whatever drops in your off colors, this is going to get you there. It'll get you to those cards, and it will get you the mana for those cards. If you flip this over, then you get Awakened Skyclave. 4/4, Vigilance, Haste. It's a land in addition to its other types, and it taps for a mana of any color. So you can use this for mana right away. You get this, 4/4 Vigilant blocker. And if you did have some way to flip this before combat, then it would have haste. That's probably being a little bit optimistic. But if you were in the real late game in a green-red deck, you could play this down, burn it out with a red spell, have it for combat, get in with haste. I'm not saying that's likely to happen, but it's possible. So yeah, the backside's just a decent chunk of creature that also makes mana. And the front side seems very playable to me. If you're wanting to ramp up to 6, 7, 8 drops, this is a great battle. And if you're just in a, kind of a battle enabler deck, like red-green, you've got things that are good at attacking battles and damaging battles. You probably play this there too because you have an easy time flipping it over. So I think there's at least a couple of deck archetypes that really want this card. It is card advantage. It fetches you out 2 pieces of cardboard and puts them on the battlefield. They happen to be lands. Lands are often what you want. You can make it so that that is exactly what you want if you build a ramp deck. All right. That brings us to the end of the common, uncommon green. So join me next time. I'm going to cover colorless and multicolored. There's only like 6 common artifacts, so we'll combine colorless and multicolored into one video. And until then, stay cool.